Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the show. It has been a busy week, busy month of news. We've had a little bit of a break, but we are back with a couple of very interesting topics to talk to you all about today. So, we are going to start off talking about Crypto Week. As some of you might be aware, there were three bills that were on Capitol Hill this past week, two of which have gone through the House, and then one of which was actually signed by President Donald Trump yesterday. So, those three bills are the Clarity Act, the Genius Act, and the Anti CBDC Act. The Genius Act was signed yesterday and established a high level regulatory framework for stablecoins. This included things like requiring 100% reserves backed by liquid assets such as USD, uh, some disclosure and audit requirements, required compliance with the Bank Security Act and anti money laundering practices and other regulatory things. The Clarity Act, which was passed on the 17th, would establish a framework for classifying whether a crypto should be classified as a commodity or security, which would then impact whether where it is regulated by which agency. And then we have the Anti-CBDC Surveillance Act, which was also passed on the 17th in the House, and will prevent the Federal Reserve from issuing a central bank digital currency, a CBDC as they are called. So starting off with the Genius Act. This is primarily focused on stablecoins, but really these three bills collectively have led to a fairly substantial rally in the overall price of cryptos over this past week. I believe the total market cap or value of all cryptos topped $4 trillion for the first time ever, which is quite exciting. So, Nate, on the Genius Act, I know you have been a pretty big holder, user, proponent of stablecoins for a while, whereas I haven't been as big of a user in them as you have. What are your thoughts on the Genius Act? Do you think this will be a net positive for the market? And yeah, just overall thoughts.
I can see where long term it may be beneficial, but there are some issues with the bill as well that I think people need to be aware of. I ultimately I don't think this bill is it. I don't think this is what we should be doing. I think there can be better iterations of it. Um, it seems they're putting a lot into this bill, and I don't know if that's necessary. Um, so some of the issues that I've seen is like regulating what type of reserves there can be. The issue with this is for smaller developers or startups or people starting their own coins that want to pursue this route, they might actually be barred from entry now because it can be hard to get certain types of reserves and certain assets to meet the
Well, like one of
requirements.
the one of the reserves that's usable is USD, right? Or like Treasury securities, which
Hmm.
even if you're a smaller institution, everybody should be able to access USD. So
Well, they can, but
can
you're
you elaborate
also
on that a little more?
yeah, because I think now what's happening though. So say if you want to use the USD, you're now forcing this startup to have a large amount of USD to meet the backend requirements. What if they want it to hold other assets?
But I mean, the whole premise of stablecoins, if a stablecoin is pegged to the USD to begin with, generally the premise has been that they have those reserves backed on the one, and it is intended
Hmm.
to be liquid and a proxy for holding the coin. So if they have asked, like, let's say you have a real estate firm, right, and you've got a bunch of properties that you want to issue a coin against, that's no longer definitionally a stable coin pegged to the currency anymore.
Right.
So I guess I'm not necessarily understanding your point. If the underlying point is it's a stable coin pegged to a currency, if it's not backed by the currency, it's not definitionally not really a stable coin anymore. You have an asset-backed token, which is functionally different.
Are most stable coins usually backed by the currency they're representing? Like, is
That's how
that
they're
where
supposed to be.
Is that where majority of their assets are though? Like, is that the case?
I mean, for the major ones, the answer I believe is yes. And if not, then I think that this is objectively a good thing because you, if you were using a stable coin like USD coin as a proxy for the US dollar, I would want it to be backed by a US dollar. I would not want it to be backed by a bunch of Chevy trucks in a yard somewhere or a house
Mm-hmm.
or a bunch of art because that's not what I'm using the coin for. I'm using it for USD. Um, I mean, so regulation in general, to your point though, regulation in general tends to be a greater burden and negatively impactful towards smaller companies and firms in general. We've seen this in the banking industry, right? Where after 2008, there was a significant increase in the regulation that was required for banks and other financial institutions that they had to maintain. And if you were a large bank, right, you have more resources to be able to handle all of that compliance versus a smaller company. And then as a consequence, starting a company in that space is harder because you then need to have that upfront capital but to be able to meet all of those demands. But I'm not necessarily sure that having USD and treasuries as a backing itself is inherently a bad thing. And the same thing with the disclosure and audit requirements, right? Having it be so that these companies are required to be audited at regular intervals to show that they actually do have the underlying reserves that they say they do from a consumer protection standpoint, I think is pretty important. I can't remember a couple of years ago, there was a scandal, right, with one of the stable coins where they were
Mm-hmm.
found to have had significantly less reserves than they were claiming to. Do you remember the incident that I'm talking
Yes.
about?
I know what you're talking about, and if I do recall, they temporarily lost their pegging, so they did lose their peg over it. Um, I'm trying to remember which coin that was.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly which coin, but I think setting a regulatory framework is generally helpful. I think the couple of criticisms that I've seen of this act are really that it doesn't have enough consumer protections.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second one is that there aren't enough protections to prevent against illicit uses, so like money laundering and that sort of thing. And so my perspective, if we take those one at a time with consumer protections, first of all, this does something, right? So criticizing it for not being far enough, I think, is I'm not educated enough on each one of the specific clauses or particular sections of the bill to be able to say have an opinion in one way or the other. But I think having something is better than nothing, which is where we were
Yes.
before, right? So pretty much anything is an improvement relative to where we were before. So while I think you might be able to criticize it on that, I'm not sure that that's necessarily where I would hang my hat.
Oh,
And
I'm
I would
not.
say probably the same thing about the anti or yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say my main issue with the Genius Act, and I'll get back to what I was saying about the reserves in a minute. But my bigger issue is, like, from what I could see, it looks like it's going to be more beneficial for platforms that are already established and less beneficial for platforms that may be up and coming. Um, that to me always opens a few doors towards future problems that we can have.
Yeah, I'm curious to see if anybody in the comments, has that similar perspective. I've read similar criticisms, but I haven't actually read rationale and a concrete articulation of why that is the case in a substantive way. Because regulation in general will always benefit incumbents, not always, but it often will benefit incumbents more unless the regulation is inherently targeted at the incumbents. Just specifically because those incumbents are going to have more resources to allocate towards dealing with said regulations. Um,
Mhm. Well, there's
and
regulations,
I
and
don't
there's
know that
also
anyone.
there's also fines. When I was looking at how they're going to be auditing a lot of these platforms, they're going to be using very new AI technology, which is already a bit controversial. But in the event the AI may create a false flag or a false negative, um, it could generate lots of fines or litigation that smaller platforms just might not have the funds to go through.
But again, yeah, but that's just a nature of having a
Yes.
regulatory framework, right? That's true of in. I mean, the alternative is then not having the regulation and the consumer protection. So uh, maybe there is a smarter way to structure that. I'm not necessarily sure what that is, um, but I don't inherently see that as. I still think it's a net positive. Now, I do think
Mm-hmm.
there is. Before we move on to the next set of bills, because we've been on this topic for quite a while, one of the big points of controversy is around a potential conflict of interest with the president and the fact that his family has been heavily involved in investing in crypto and stable coins, and this is a bill that has a potential to benefit, excuse me, his family's net worth fairly substantially. I do not have the stats on hand as to what their holdings or investments are in stable coins in particular. I do know that they launched Trump coin, which has added to their net worth quite a bit. And there's been a lot of talk of them being very pro crypto and investing capital there. Even let's say that the Trump family does have a material amount of holdings in various stablecoin companies and technologies.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on this conflict of interest discussion? Do you think that there's anything material there, or it's just kind of another one of these trying to find any way to hate Donald Trump that the media possibly can?
Realistically, I think for issues like that, it's impossible to get to a real answer because there so much is misrepresented or mischaracterized. You never know what article you're reading is factual. Who's to say how, like, we don't actually know the level of involvement behind the scenes that Donald Trump might have with these things. We just see what's on the surface. And regardless, either way, would it be bad? Yeah, it would be. Is it something I'm worried about? No. If Donald Trump is doing something to profit off of this or has some other motivations behind it, it's just that's just what it is. And what I care more about is just seeing bills get passed that are going to help adoption of crypto.
Yeah,
You
that's
know,
kind of where
and
I am as well. It's a
yeah,
net positive for the industry, for a very
mm-hmm,
important technology and asset class that we should be supporting. And if he's benefiting off of that,
yeah,
obviously we like I said, we don't know what his level of involvement is. But at the end of the day, this also had to go through two other layers of the government, and so not I
yeah.
don't think you can put it all on him either
If
way.
yeah, if
Corruption
it's
is not good, right? But it's also
right,
not like you unilaterally pass this, and at the end of the day, everybody's going to have some degree of
yeah,
vested interest in the things that they're putting forward, anyways.
yeah,
So I agree. It's like a whole lot of
yeah,
hoopla about nothing. Clarity Act. I don't think we need to spend a whole lot of time on. I think it's just kind of objectively a good thing to have now assigned ownership of who how you're going to decide whether something's a commodity or security, and then ownership between the different regulatory agencies of what they are
mm-hmm,
specified to oversee, and they can't just pass it back and forth and say, oh, it's not my problem, or have an agency go gung-ho and decide to overly regulate. So I
right,
think adding that clarity, it's something that the industry has wanted for a while, and that is a first step towards further clarity, further regulation, and which will then lead to big money being able to more meaningfully step into this, which would be net beneficial for everyone who is in the space.
Yes. I'm going to be honest. This was one of those bills that when I was reading, in the back of my head, it's just screaming, why isn't this already a thing? What?
Yeah, it's
What?
crazy that it's taken this long to just determine who's going to regulate something, right? I mean,
Yeah.
regardless of where you stand on the technology, bull, bear, you should everyone should be in favor of having a framework for how it should be regulated.
Yeah.
It can only be
Right.
a good thing. So
Well,
this is
it's the
just a
equivalent.
net W for
Yeah, it's the equivalent of like a business starting 13 years ago and reaching a market cap of $4 trillion before it's officially recognized as like, maybe we should find a way to regulate these guys. Like,
yeah.
you waited till 4 trillion market cap? Okay. That's a bit silly to me. I mean, crypto's been a thing for 13 years now. 14, I
Yeah.
mean, it depends on how far back you want to go, but really it's been in the public eye for about 13
Yeah.
years now. And yeah, the fact that it took them this long to get to a point where it's like, maybe we need to outline who's responsible for looking at this stuff. Like 13 years.
Yeah. It's a little sad, but now we have it now. On the Anti-Surveillance State Act, what
Mm-hmm.
we have you and I have discussed this in the past because from what I recall when China hosted the Olympics, there was a lot of talk of them issuing a CBDC. And
Yes.
then at the time there was a lot of discussion right around the level of power for a government of that size that allows for them. There's a lot of good that can come from having a CBDC, but also a lot from a surveillance state perspective, from a control perspective that you can be abused, right? And so, as an example, just for the listeners, before I turn it over to you, this could potentially give the central bank visibility into every single one of your transactions. And it could also give them an unparalleled ability to freeze people out of the capital markets. And so if someone or a group of people have a dissenting opinion from you or from an alternative political party, they would have visibility potentially into all of your wallets and all of your
Mm-hmm.
currency and could essentially freeze your ability to transact if they're controlling the full set of payment rails. Again, there were quite a few assumptions in there because it really depends on how you structure and set it up. But if it is set up in that way, they could have that power. Now, on the flip side of that, with that power and that visibility, they could do good things, right? Like if there's a natural disaster, the population of people that are impacted, you could very quickly and easily identify all of those people and their wallets and send the relief directly into the accounts of those people near instantaneously. And think of any parallel or adjacent example where the ability to identify a population impacted by something and move funds very, very quickly into those people's accounts could be beneficial, right? So that is a positive of it. But the surveillance state and the control is really the primary concern that I have
Mm-hmm.
heard and seen as a risk to the CBDCs. So kind of with all of that backdrop in mind, where do you stand, Nate, on is this being good or bad
Oh,
overall?
this is definitely one of those bills that I was looking at where I was like, I think this one should have been broken up a little bit. Because like what you said with like a natural disaster, yeah, that's great. However, there's also catches to the downside. And one thing that I was thinking though is like, do we really need a central currency though for our government to have some level of debt relief using crypto like that? I don't think so. I think there's other ways to go about that than having a CBDC. You can just use something that's pegged to the USD that the government can use without making it an official crypto of some sort. But I like some things about this. And just to clarify, this is the anti-CBDC Act, so it's preventing the government from doing this. And I understand why people do not want the government to have this bill, but there are some downsides we really need to be aware of. One of the ones that I'm concerned with is later on down the road, if all these other nations are having their own CBDCs, this can prevent the US from participating in lots of financial networks of the future. And the US can potentially lose its leadership position, like in terms of like with the global financial system. That's what I'm getting to there.
Yeah, the dollar dominance, where it's the reserve currency of the world.
I think some things in this bill are great. I understand why people might want an anti-CBDC. I'm just concerned there might be better ways to go about it. This one might be too aggressive, and it could actually be neutering America in the digital landscape in the long run. There are benefits to having a CBDC, and this bill is basically saying no, never. I don't think that's a good idea to put on an emerging tech. We don't know where crypto is going to be 75 years from now. Who's to say a CBDC isn't a great idea in 75 years?
I think that's a fair take, in that it's probably a bit extreme of reaction and one built out of fear, and all of the fears that people have that I had listed previously, I think, are valid. At the same time, the advantages that blockchain technology have are very real, and there's probably and possibly a middle ground that enables a currency to take advantage of all the benefits of existing as a blockchain without infringing on the privacy of the American public. And I think probably the concern is that there's a little bit of a slippery slope, which is obviously an argument and logical fallacy. But when it comes to government, I will say I do think particularly our government has a very good history of taking an inch and then taking a mile. That said, and in particular, right, privacy is always a big topic, but we've also seen in the past, when it is in our interest, cough, cough, the Patriot Act, there is a willingness to put privacies aside if it is in the name of national security or other things. And so not giving the government that power, I can kind of see both sides of it.
Right. But we can just have a bill, though, that just outlines what a CBDC should look like, and we can just have privacy as a basic feature of the CBDC. You can do that. I don't see having a bill that completely blocks them from ever making a CBDC.
Yeah, but the counterpoint to that is, if the government created it and has sole control over it, they can change the protocols and all of that whenever they want to. And all it takes is a Patriot Act 2.0 to change the way that it is governed and mandate the change of the programming, which it might take a couple of years. I don't know.
Yes.
But now, I mean, it does not take that long, or I mean, it would take a while, but you can easily see a scenario where that completely flips.
Yeah, I can. But at the same time, it's hard for me to imagine a future where the US does not have a CBDC. I just don't see like a long-term future.
You're envisioning basically the whole world is using CBDCs and digital currency in general.
Yeah, that's like, again, crypto is only 13 years old. The internet started in the 60s. If we're in 1975, imagine trying to pass a bill that's like, no, We're going to make it so our government never has their own internet in 1975. I'm sure this will never backfire. 50. Imagine what that would look like in 2025. That would it wouldn't hold. It would be a major issue.
That's fair.
Like crypto is
That's
too
fair.
early on. We haven't adopted it enough yet. We don't know what the cascade effect of it is going to be in globalization. We know that it's happening. It could still be 75 years out, but before it globalizes fully. I don't think so, because if you follow the market cap increasing, it's happening. We just don't know when. And it will get to a point where I think a couple countries are going to have a good CBDC. They're going to show the advantages and how it's better than a fiat currency, safer. You can probably use it for anti-corruption purposes too. It has a lot of good reasons to implement. A couple countries are going to do it correctly, and everyone else is going to have to get on board.
I think that's fair.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to the next topic we have here. So, Bhutan is building this new mega city, some have called the anti Dubai. It is the Gelembu Mindfulness City, also known as the GMC. So, for some background on Bhutan in general, it is a country with a population of about 800,000, placed roughly on the kind of northeastern side of India, between India and China. I think it's bordering Tibet as well. It is a constitutional monarchy, and it has a GDP of about $3 billion. So it's a pretty small country. Last month, they closed a fundraise. So they were looking to raise about $2 billion in bonds to help finance the development of this mega city. That is equating to about $20 million USD. They ended up being oversubscribed and raising $30 million in USD, roughly. It's a little more, but rounding here. And so the premise of this city is it is supposed to be an economic hub for the country, and an avenue for tourists to be able to come and then explore the rest of the country. And it's really cool. I would encourage everyone to go check out the website, where they've got some renditions and a video kind of overlaying what it's intended to look like. But it's this the country has a very big Buddhist influence, and it really is reflected in the way this city is designed, where it's very modern and futuristic, with drones and kind of cool public transportation and railways going everywhere. And all of the designs, a lot of the designs for the buildings are very modern. At the same time, the city itself is blends in with nature. It's not one of these mega metropolis kind of like monstrosities like New York City or Chicago or something like that, where it's just this gigantic hunk of metal. The city itself is supposed to be about 1,000 square kilometers, which is 2.5% of the entire land area of the country, which is pretty substantial. And there is not a set completion date, but construction is underway. And the bonds that were raised were for the building of just the airport, which, from what I understand, is expected to cost about $500 million USD. And a couple extra data points, because there have been a few people, including Nate here, who were interested in buying those bonds. They were initially only available to citizens and residents of Bhutan, and they are only available for retail investors. So institutions cannot own them. After the first year of issuance, they can be resold and purchased on the secondary market. And I think that they're currently only available on the local security exchange of Bhutan. So I'm not sure that's going
Mm-hmm.
to change in a year from now. And also, quite frankly, I'm also not sure how to set up an account on that exchange in another country. But that is the couple considerations if any of you are interested or have been thinking about how you can invest in this particular project. So, Nate, general thoughts on the city. When do you think it is going to be one? So, do you think it's actually going to ever be finished, or do you think it's going to be one of those projects that's just going to go on forever? Um, And if it is finished, would you go and live there?
So I have to be honest and upfront. I'm incredibly biased here. I love this idea. The idea of a city being designed with the intention on being healthy for its residents versus, you know, uh, intentionally causing people to seek activity or like capitalism and all this other stuff. Like, I'm not anti-capitalist or anything, but I just really enjoy the breath of fresh air that a city's like, no, we're designing ourselves in a way that just makes people happy and feel at ease. And I'm like,
This city,
that's
for
awesome.
the listeners, it's supposed to be based on the country has what they call the gross national happiness philosophy, which one of the monarchs in the 1970s set as a mantra for the country. And the philosophy is that it prioritizes citizens' happiness over pure economic growth. That's what Nate is referring to here. Sorry,
Yeah.
keep going, Nate.
Yeah. And I get it. There's a bunch of downsides to that. There's a lot. You can't guarantee how long your country is going to be around for when your only focus is happiness and not growth. But it seems they're really working on a creative solution to finding a way to meet happiness and grow at the same time. They're profiting off of making people happy. I like this idea. And this is kind of why I also love the nickname, the anti Dubai. It's the opposite of everything Dubai stands for. And just seeing how they still want to incorporate leading technologies and all that, I think this is going to be a great place for future research. I can see that this is a place where lots of researchers, doctors, scientists, they're going to want to go because they're going to want to do their research in places where they can mentally relax at the same time. I work in research centers in the US, and these guys are burned out. These guys are not happy. Quality of life with scientists and doctors that I've worked with in the medical field, low. It is not good. Seeing a city that may want to prioritize keeping all of its people happy, I just see that if they can find any type of sustainable economic model, a lot of people are going to want to live here in the future.
Yeah, so I have mixed thoughts on this city. So one other thing I forgot to mention is the city will be 100% powered by renewable energy. So Bhutan generates quite a lot of hydropower, and is actually, from my understanding, one of their biggest exports into India and one of their biggest sources of revenue. So the city as a premise is very cool, and I think it will stir up quite a lot of tourism, which will be good for the local economy. What I worry about is if it will actually lead to more production of something, whether that's research, medicine, some
Mm.
sort of particular product, because to sustain it, right? And this is going to be an expensive project. Just the airport, from what I
So
read, is $500 million. We're talking about that's
yes,
1/6 of the GDP of the country just on the airport for this particular city. And
yes.
the other concern, right, is if you're the tourism revenue, particularly as it progresses and has milestones and is able to sustain modest tourism, right? That's going to happen before it is completely built. That will be good for providing some amount of sustainability. But as there are recessions or other global macroeconomic events, if the country becomes too overly reliant on that tourism and it's really the primary driver, like if the country was to go from a $3 billion GDP to a $30 billion or $100 billion GDP over the course of the next 10 to 20 years, but all of that is stemming from tourism, and then that tap turns off, that will lead to a massive negative impact on the local population. So
Hmm.
they'll need to really think of how, and maybe they have, and I just haven't read about it. They Happiness is all well and good, but having being able to continue to provide food, shelter, and sustain the city
Yes.
is also going to be important because the maintenance of it, right? When you look at it, it's not going to have the same upkeep cost as a New York City, but to keep it clean, running smoothly, to have all of these public services operating at a high level to build the type of environment that they're looking for, it's going to cost money, and they're going to need to have a way to be able to generate that meaningfully
Yes.
and sustainably.
Um, yeah, the city is going to be expensive, and it's going to be expensive to maintain. Um, the from what I'm aware of, the main and going back to what you said about the research. So the main reason that I think they're going to focus a lot on STEM specifically is because they, from what I could tell, they seem to focus on technology, but more so in a healthy way. They're not interested in social media. They're not interested in a lot of the tech firms and tech companies we have that are essentially for profit, and that's their entire purpose. They seem to be interested in technology in terms of what can technology provide that is useful for our people. And this is why they've been slow to progress in the past, is because they have been hesitant to take on any new technology because they see a lot of new technology as community breakers. They don't want to adopt any of that. And it looks like they're keeping that in mind with this city. So that really limits the direction of the technology they can go. I think that's going to push them in the
Yeah,
direction of STEM, research, medical, things like that. Also, one of the reasons they've got desperate enough to try this city is because they're having a population issue where a lot of their children are becoming educated and then they're all leaving the country and never returning because there's not they don't have high education jobs available in the country because of their lack of technology. So this is also an attempt to keep people, their younger generation, in the country and to stop leaving the country. So they're trying to retain the population they have, build on that, invest in their own people, and keep their educated people around. I do see this city as completing all of those. The one catch, though, is going to be, can they afford to actually do this? That's the only
yeah. I
caveat
mean,
I see.
research itself doesn't typically make money, right? Like it needs to there needs to be a product or something at the end of it that you can sell in some
Yeah.
way, shape, or form or license. So another thing to keep in mind there.
Hmm.
Um, what these types of cities, this is a healthier version of a Dubai, and I believe the UAE, if I'm not mistaken, it's either Saudi Arabia or the UAE. Isn't there supposed to be some other city that's being built, like some like a floating city or something that's all solar powered or something like that?
That's yeah, but that's
That I've
been in
heard.
the that's been in pre-alpha for so long. I've kind of given up on it ever releasing. You know, that's
But yeah, do you think a city like the GMC could ever be? Maybe the wellness is probably not going to happen because we're all too capitalistic over here. But the just the way that it is designed, these cities of the future, is do you think that's something that could be developed in the West, or no, just because of how
no,
utilitarian everything is?
I don't think so because what's going to happen is, I mean, just look at the West. The moment Western people found out Japanese people are nice, next thing you know, we have influencers going over there just to harass them and to get them to react negatively. Like, if we started a project over here to be a better city, people are going to go there just to mess with it. I don't
Well,
see
I was
something.
talking about purely the technology and design aspect. The GMC, the healthy and wellness aspect, I think is just not going to happen because of how we are as a society is too culturally different. But the
Yeah.
technology, yeah, like building a new city from scratch or completely remodeling a major city, that's been a topic for like 15 years, right? The cities of the future and all of that stuff. There's been a bunch of funding for it, and
I
nothing's really
think
happened.
I think it's going to happen. And it's funny you bring that up because I think that's going to inadvertently be one of our solutions to the climate issues we're having with certain cities like New Orleans and stuff. They are A lot of people don't understand the severity of some of these areas, but it's because of the type of soil the cities are built on. New Orleans is sinking more every year. A lot of people don't know that. They think, oh no, the water level is getting higher. It's not the water level alone that's the problem. The city is also lowering itself too naturally. So even if we stopped the water, we're just slowing down the inevitable. So
Yeah.
I think at a certain point, it's actually going to be beneficial for some of these cities. Like New Orleans is right next to a massive lake. It could slowly develop into a city of the future where it's like, hey, we just moved New Orleans to float. That's New Orleans now. It's a floating city. And then you can scuba dive into old New Orleans, you know. But like, I don't know how far off in the future that is, but we're going to be forced sooner or later to make some dramatic city developments. And I don't see a reason why that iteration won't be tried at least one time with like Miami is sinking. Like we're losing city. We're going to be losing some cities. We're going to need
Along the
some,
coast. Yeah, and along the
we're
water.
going to need to come up with some very creative solutions for the displaced people. Okay. Who's to say we don't make an artificial city right next to one of these cities and that artificial city doesn't have the coastal issues because the city can, I don't know, float or whatever it can do,
That would
you know.
be the modern American Atlantis.
I mean, I
Okay.
think we have the technology to pull it off. I think we do. It's just whether or not it's cost effective.
Yeah, who's paying for that one? Well, we can use all our tariff money to build a floating New Orleans.
Yeah. I
All right,
mean,
on to our
yeah.
last topic we got here of tariffs. So tariffs have obviously been a huge topic ever since the election, where it was a huge campaigning point for Donald Trump, and then since he took office in really I always forget the name of the beginning of April day where he just announced a bunch of tariffs. He announced a bunch of tariffs, and it feels like every other day there's a change to some tariff on some country, or it's 10% one day, 50% the next day, 25% the next day, or if you're China, I think it went for like 300% at one point. There were retaliatory tariffs for like 24 hours or something stupid. But it was recently reported that the U.S. has topped $100 billion in tariff revenue for the first time in a fiscal year ever. So we've topped $108 billion net. I think it's like $113 billion gross, though I'm not sure what the difference
Wow.
between net and gross is. In the first 9 months of the fiscal year, more than doubling the prior year's tariff revenue. Now, there is the question of where is that coming from, right? Is that just an extra tax on the American people? And is that going to show up in the CPI and in inflation numbers? And so we got the latest inflation numbers recently. Inflation in the month of June rose from 2.7% in June, up from 2.4% in May. But various caveats there. The first being 1 month of inflation data is never actually that relevant. And then the second being, in anticipation of the tariffs, most companies in America were stockpiling inventory for months and months in advance of it,
Mm-hmm.
anticipating that this was going to happen to try to mitigate the costs, or at least in the near term, on their customer base and the consumer base. And so it is likely, excuse me, that we are not going to actually see any potential inflation impacts until the fourth quarter of the year in the September, October timeframe. And
Mm-hmm.
even then, it is uncertain what those inflation impacts will be. So, Nate, what are your thoughts on this tariff news, these tariff policies? Do you think this incremental tariff revenue really is just taxing the American public in a different way? Or do you think there is a net benefit overall, whether it's from a revenue perspective or a uh, kind of, what's the right word? A relationship with our partners perspective in terms of ability to do business across borders. And I would delineate between China and everyone else, right? So definitely separate them because I think the way that, and we're in agreement, the approaches to those two should be different for a number of reasons.
Mm-hmm. The tariff one is tricky because tariffs involve a lot of numbers, and I think there's a misrepresentation
Wow, thank you.
behind.
That was very insightful.
Yeah, yes, right. So so what I'm getting to is
I'm glad to know there's a lot of numbers involved in tariffs.
because
I thought it was letters actually.
well, there are a few letters involved, but because of the metrics being so transparent, a lot of I think it gives a misrepresentation into it being quantifiable. Just because we understand a lot of the variables at play when it comes to tariffs doesn't mean we can actually measure whether or not the tariff is good or bad. There's unquantifiable parts of the tariff, such as going into what initially kicked it off. Trump just wanted to send a message to some countries like, hey, you're going to put tariffs on us, we're going to put tariffs on you. Okay. It looks like he was able to get a few good deals out of this. That's great. Who knows how long those good deals will stand? And it's hard to quantify actually how good this will be in the long run. Does it potentially cost Americans more than it nets us? Yes. Right now, short term, probably. What about in the long run, though? It's very hard to speculate what the 50-year outlook on these changes might be. Some of these tariffs could hold better deals with certain countries for upwards of 50 years from now. If that's the case, then it's really hard for me to say, oh no, a few billion this year, it makes the tariffs a net negative. And that's what I mean. By the tariffs having so many transparent metrics, I think it gives a false sense of quantifiability, when in reality, if we want to actually look at all the variables going on, we cannot quantify them fully. So it's really difficult to speculate on whether or not these tariffs are overall good or bad.
Yeah, I think there's a couple elements to it. The one thing I'll note is that what a lot of people probably don't really appreciate, as most people aren't exposed to it, is that it is significantly easier for pretty much any company anywhere else in the world to come into America and do business than it is for America to go into almost any other country in the world and also do business.
Mm-hmm.
And that is just a result of the way that our country is set up. The laws and the regulations are very it's why we are the best country in the world to invest in, to start a company, to do business, is because we have a regulatory and legal framework that enables that. And so other countries, many of whom are our allies, are also able to kind of take advantage of that, right? And they'll sell a significant and export a significant amount of products to our country while still making it quite challenging for our products to be sold in their countries. Um, and so there's people have this perspective that tariffs are universally a bad thing and that they're a cost, right? And for decades, there was the kind of open economic, I forget the exact technical term, this economic theory, right? That every country has its own area of expertise, right? That they
Mm-hmm.
add to the world. And if they are able to produce something at the best cost or the best, they're able to produce something that's the best at the best cost or whatever, that every country should just do that. We shouldn't have any tariffs, and we should all just have free trade, right? And so what that led to was that worked for a while for business, and then what that led to was the offshoring of a lot of jobs
Mm-hmm.
to other countries, and it allowed certain countries like China to become a real competitor to the United States, because it wasn't monitored. And ultimately, I think with that, policy just doesn't take into account is that it's impractical and that there are certain things that as a country that you want to have control over and certain industries that you want to protect for national security reasons or even to make sure that there is a certain amount of certain types of jobs in your country to enable economic prosperity and mobility. One of the biggest areas across pretty much every country in the world that is heavily subsidized via tariffs and other means is the agriculture industry, right? I mean, our agriculture industry is very heavily supported by the government, dairy in particular, right? I mean, the whole "Got Milk" campaign is a bunch of
Yeah.
government propaganda, if we're being transparent about it. Um,
Hmm.
so think that I'm pretty neutral personally on if the tariffs are going to be good or bad. I think, like you said, it's one of those things that's going to take years to really see what the net impact of it is going to be.
Hmm.
I think this is one of those. There is for sure going to be some very visible, immediate short term pain via the increase in price of high profile items, cars as a big example due to the Mexico Canada tariffs, right?
Yeah.
And that the media being what the media is and exceptionally left and exceptionally anti Trump is basically just going to take this and make it seem like it's the worst thing ever and it's ruining America. And not really have the discussion or the analysis one way or the other of really trying to steel man and straw man if it really is as bad as we're making it out to be and fairly weigh the pros and the cons. I do think that the resetting of some of these trade agreements is probably a good thing with
Hmm.
respect to both the agreed amount of exports and imports with countries as well as the resetting of certain tariff levels between certain partners. And I do think that there is going to inevitably be a cost to the American people for this, at least in the short term. Long term, we shall see. Um, I think that probably net net will end up in a fairly neutral spot because some people are going to benefit and some people are going to be hurt. And I'm not sure that it'll overwhelmingly be one way or the other. But I think that the hope is that in the future there's a little bit more of a fair international business environment.
I think I think that if it seems that some good trade deals have already been made that will be profitable for us in the long term. However, we still have a lot of open trades that we have a lot of open trade deals that are still being negotiated. I think as long as none of them are blundered, like, when we come to an actual agreement with China, I think that is going to be the ultimate, like, okay, like, we're going to be able to speculate much better on if this is a net good or net negative. However, with the other countries outside of China, it looks like we're at a net positive in terms of the long term forecast for profitability. Short term, yeah, but I think short term are the essential, how to phrase it, the tax on the American people currently with the tariffs. Most of that's coming from China, I believe, in terms of the increased costs or the speculated increased costs that are coming up.
Depends on the goods, right? I mean, for cars,
Yeah,
most of our cars are made in Canada, Mexico, as well as like the parts, right? So we've seen
right.
a lot of
And
talk of cars going up pretty dramatically, which are in this country because our public transportation system is so terrible, a
mhm,
necessity, right? So
yes.
I don't know that that's wholly true.
Hmm.
I would imagine that I don't have the stat on my fingertips that we import a significant amount of stuff from China, right? So
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, I think right now, as long as we don't mess up the deals that are open, just getting them slightly better than what they were, which I think is reasonable for a lot of them, then that puts us in a better spot than we would be.
yeah, we'll see if we can actually get to that point, and in
Yeah.
particular with China, right? Because I mean, in his first presidency, there was basically a 4-year long pissing contest with China, and then we never really reached anything.
Mm-hmm.
At least from what I recall. I mean, it was a lot of talking and not a lot of stuff
Yeah.
actually happening. Um,
Yeah.
I it's I think I think the way he's going about this is super annoying and not particularly the most effective in terms of it makes it near impossible to plan for businesses, including small businesses, right? Because
Right.
you have no idea what the costs are.
I,
Now
I
we can only judge his negotiating style after this is all said and done,
right.
but it is super super challenging for businesses to do any semblance of
I,
planning and operations. And you have some small businesses that I've seen kind of like one-off anecdotes that because of these tariffs that have been like wiped out overnight because they import their products and like they
yep.
just can't
Well,
sustain them anymore, right?
I think that is an unfortunate. I think that's intentional at this point. Not for small businesses to go out of business, of course, but his style of doing this, the difficulty that businesses are having is a byproduct of his style, and I think it's intentional. Because he doesn't want to be predictable. He doesn't want China to know what he's going to do, or these other countries. He doesn't want to give them anything that they could use to bring to the negotiating table.
And I
Essentially,
think
yeah.
that's proponent's assumption, and I don't think it's an inherently bad assumption, but I think the merits of that will only be validated if he's actually able to get to good agreements at the end of this and we actually get to agreements. And so, like
Yes.
you've said, and I've repeated, we'll have to see. I think right now there is a lot of negative of the way that he is negotiating, candidly,
Mm-hmm.
because it makes it impossible for business of any size to plan how they're going to operate. Right, when you've got this kind of, because it's not just like business planning isn't just plugging numbers in a spreadsheet. It's planning your raises for your employees. It's planning your hiring plans. It's new product introductions, how you're going to invest capital and where, what types of, right? And so that is actually a negative on the overall economy and potentially economic growth, as well as the employee base, right? There are a number of companies who have been doing layoffs as a result of this or frozen promotions, probably are going to do lower raises as a consequence. And so we'll see. I think the only thing, one thing with this, right, and I think it's true regardless of who is in office and whatever party you are an affiliate of,
Mm-hmm.
whether you like them or not, or whether you should want the policies to be successful and by be successful, I mean be a net positive for America overall. And so I just have to kind of hope that that's where we land up, right? Because there's not much else that we can do here.
I just think it's kind of an inevitability that it's going to be a rough process for a lot of people, businesses included. I can only hope that, when these deals get actually made and we see the outcome, we can finally decide, like, okay, you know what, this was worth it.
Knock on wood.
Right? Like, that's the biggest, like, what more can we do?
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, you
It's
could. I mean, you
just,
could go on Reddit and cry about it, or stand on
no.
street corners and with signs and protest and block traffic of
Yeah,
people who are
I'll
just
just get
trying to move
another,
about their day.
I'll just get another Reddit account banned. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
you know, no, you can't spread logic around there.
All right. Well, good discussion on these three topics. Thank you all for tuning in and listening in. If you have any thoughts on what we discussed, if you agree, disagree, would love to hear what you guys think of these different topics, the tariffs, the new crypto policies, this GMC city that Bhutan is building. Please leave us a comment down below, like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next episode.